Hey, Saint.
Hello, good morning, Malika, or good afternoon for you.
I know. Good afternoon. I'm running out right after this. How you doing this morning? I know you just got finished with working. I mean, that has to be um insane. You been asleep yet? No.
No, Dad, what do you call it? Dad powers, Dad. What's that word I'm looking for? Like this is part of when you work all night, your brain shuts down a little. I'm on dad energy right now, like because I had my kids right when I got off work, and I'd take one of them to a he's in Boy Scouts, so he's there. They do a tree thing, so he's got to unload the trucks. Then I had to get my other son, so I'm on full time dad energy at the moment.
That's good. I mean, I could, more power to you parents that actually, to people that work late and work overnight and with those kind of shifts. I'm thinking about you.
I appreciate it. It's not by choice. We're very short staffed where we're worked right now, so we're having to do like 8 extra spots a month, and it's the holidays, so people are taking vacation. I'm on a nice 11-day stretch. I mean, the money's nice, but I do like my life.
Yeah, I appreciate you also for joining me for this space and thinking about, I swear, first of all, for those joining, thanks for joining. This is the Rewind Pod where I'll discuss sports and music history. And we usually look at it at the lens of like through the lens of media, but sometimes we usually go by memory and research, and that's what today's room is. I'm going to be doing throwback rooms on every team in the NBA, looking at a particular time in Nets history. So I'm going to do the Nets in different segments. Today, we're actually going to just talk about the Jason Kidd era. Um, we're going to, yeah, Jason Kidd area, the Jason Kidd era. We're going to talk about Petrovic and Derrick Coleman separate. Then we're going to, I may skip the Buck Williams era, even though he has a lot of records in history for us. I don't know if I'm going to go over his time, but I am going to eventually get to the Julius Irving ABA time, since those are the only championships we own, the ABA ones.
Yeah, unfortunately. But
And not to test.
this kid era is what really, really made me fall in love with the
That's
Nets.
what
Like I
made you fall in love with them. One of my stepfather was a huge fan of Dr. J, so that's how I Um, like he used to watch Dr. J when he was a Sixer still, but he was like, well, his root was with the Nets, and I was like, well, why aren't we Nets fans? So that's what eventually, like, I was like, you know what, I'm going to be a fan of the Nets. I went contrary to the rest of the family, but we're going to eventually get there because Julius Irving, to me, like people say, who was our greatest net? Jason Kidd, right? But Dr. J was in that too at one point, so we are going to pay him some homage, but it'll be later in the year. But today we're here to talk about Jason Kidd. I watched a few of the games recently, and when I think about the team that we do have, Saint, right now, I just knew. I said, you know what? Jason Kidd took us to the promised land. He didn't get us over the hump. He didn't get us. We didn't get a championship, but we did get to two finals. We were in the playoffs on a regular basis with Jason Kidd, and then it went up in smoke. And we've been searching for that pumpkin ever since. And when we got KD and Kyrie, I was like, you know what? They're going to take us back. And it hasn't happened yet. So it just got me reminiscent about this team and looking at the heart of the team. And so we're going to open a discussion. We're going to just have an open discussion about the Jason Kidd era. If you want to come up on stage, you can. Feel free to raise your hand, and I will bring you on stage, and you can join the conversation. But when we think about the makeup of the 2001 team, is important. One thing is important to remember, I think, is that Kerry Kittles was drafted in '96, and he was one of the. He was still young, but he was a vet. He was technically a veteran. When you look at it, was his technically his 6th year when Jason Kidd got there, I believe, because he was drafted in '96, so it was like his fifth, 6th year. And Kenyon Martin was drafted in 2000. Richard Jefferson was drafted in 2001. So those guys are fairly young, and of course, Richard Jefferson was the starter his first, his rookie year.
And Van
Um,
Horn was 97 as well.
yes, and when we think about, yeah, and when I look at that team, I'm always, it's, it was it was the perfect team for them. When you think about it, you know, we needed. They got us to where we always wanted to be. They got us to the finals. I figured the second time we got there, and we're going to get there, is when we faced the Spurs. We actually won a few games out of that series. It wasn't like we were swept the previous year, like when we were swept by the Lakers. But at least with the Spurs, we did win 2 games. But, I don't know. This game, this particular year, we have free throw issues in some of these, but we'll get there. So let's start talking about this team. Like when you think back on this team, you're not just the finals, but what do you think about the construction of the 2001 2002 team?
I mean, for me, like, because last night after you told me that classic game was on there, like I had forgot about that game against the Pacers, like how like ridiculous that game was going to double overtime. And it took me back to because like I grew up watching basketball, but I was the only person in my house that liked basketball. So like I randomly caught games when I was younger when I lived in Jersey. And then as I got a little bit older, I kind of was just like I watched whatever basketball was on. And then as time, I got a little bit older and it got closer to when I was around 20 to 23, I could see the Nets more. There were ways to see them more. So for me, when that happened, like my brother, I spent my whole life going back and forth between West Coast and East Coast growing up because of how my parents split. So I got to experience like Arizona, California, like New Jersey, and just bounce, bounce, bounce. But at the time, my brother was a Suns fan, and that's when they had Kid, and he absolutely like he was the only other person that liked basketball, and he absolutely loved the Suns, loved Kid, and like I just remember when that unfortunate reason why he came to the Nets, why they got rid of him, but like my brother was so mad and I was like I knew what kind of player we were getting and I was just like beyond exciting and that's when I really started like I started paying attention to that team a little bit before he got there, but like once he got there it just like I just became engrossed in the team and like I had been a fan of like Keith Van Horn. I liked that. I liked the Kenyon Martin pickup. I liked Kerry Kittles. I was even like a Lucius Harris fan. Like I liked the scrappiness that this team had, and it's like I was watching that game last night. You told me like, thank God that game kept me awake at work. But it just struck me like how much different ball was being played back then. At least
Absolutely.
right? Like, and then I'm looking at our current state, and I'm like, oh my god, this is embarrassing. Like, no, like everybody on that team played defense. Everybody
Yeah.
communicated. We were coached so well. And then it's like you look at today, and you're like, how do we have these players? And I look at this squad, and I'm just like, and it was just such an unfortunate that we ran into when the West was a juggernaut. You had the Lakers one year,
Yeah.
Kobe and
And
Shaq,
then you
and
had the
it's like,
Spurs dynasty the next year.
yeah,
I think it's unfortunate we hit those two particular teams, but I love the fact that we weren't swept back to back. First of all, it's important to point that we weren't
yeah,
swept, but it was a source of pride that they made the finals. But the funny thing is, and I wouldn't mind a player like Kenyon Martin right now, because he wasn't no punk. You know what I mean?
No,
And you know,
he
like, and
wasn't.
he will knock you on your ass if he felt like it. Like, so I wouldn't mind a player like Kenyon. And it was funny. I was watching a game. I even watched a game when during the Vince Carter years, and this weekend, and I was just reminiscing about that era, and I don't know, like. I would love to have a Kenyon Martin right now, and Jason Kidd as a point guard. The funny thing about Jason Kidd was, like he was that player that when you look at him at face value, like he wasn't, he was a PG, but he wasn't the fastest. He wasn't like I remember me and my friend was talking about it. He was like, it was just so many things you could say, okay, he's not this, he's not that. But to me, but when you look at Jason Kidd, I mean, like he still holds our records for assists, for steals. He's still one of my favorite players that's played. Well, of course, he's my one of my favorite Nets. But Jason Kidd, like that led Jason Kidd led team. I mean, they went as far as we like when you look at the series, especially 2001, 2002. We needed him. If Jason Kidd didn't score over 20 points, we didn't win a game.
Yeah. No, I mean, but he was the perfect guy to fit in with that squad. Like Rod
Yeah,
Thorne did like a great job of like picking players, and
of
then
pulling
they
that team
could,
together. Yeah,
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 and you couldn't have found like a better guy to facilitate that team, just hitting guys. I mean, his court vision was, that
yeah,
is like, it always
ridiculous.
will come down to
His
be,
IQ was
yeah,
always like, yeah, his IQ is always superior to anyone on the court.
just running. And when I think a kid, I just think of him running down the middle of the court, scanning everything and hitting ridiculous passes or alley oops. And they had the perfect guys that were willing to go up and jump. Like Kenyon Martin was jumping out of the gym at the time.
Yeah,
Like when he came up, like guy had the most ridiculous hops I'd seen in a long time. But it just, every piece kind of complimented him during that time. And obviously the 2000, those two back to back years were probably our best chances, and then things obviously changed. But
yeah. The
it
construction of the team went the other
went,
way.
yeah, it
Eventually, we
went
got
another
Jackie
way.
Vaughn on this team. Yeah, like it just, yeah, those were our best chances. We just happened to, and it's important to point out also. We'll get to the only and the grown. Um, the previous year, the Nets before Jason Kidd got there, we were 26-52, somewhere around there, something like that. And like we only won 26 games, but it's important to say that Kerry Kittles was injured that entire year also. Um, the next year, Kerry Kittles was back because he was injured the previous year, and we got Jason Kidd. But it just looks like on paper, Jason Kidd joined the team and you won 52 games. It was more than that, but his shot in the arm to our franchise, can't be denied.
Yeah,
Um,
because you were passing from the Marbury years to the Kid years.
yeah, yeah. It was just a big difference. The only you can go, and then we'll go to grown before we get into talking about that playoff series.
Gotcha. Thank you for having me. This is actually a perfect segue. I don't know if you guys remember, but it was kind of a little bit risky. Marbury was all NBA, if I remember right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So getting J Kidd, it wasn't guaranteed. I know there was a little murky history in Phoenix, but
Yeah.
Jason Kidd coming in, he didn't even have the highest salary on the team. I was shocked. I was looking up like little facts. Van
Mm-hmm.
Horn
Mm-hmm.
actually made more than Jason Kidd
Yep.
that year. That's
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's just crazy how Jason Kidd just came in and just totally morphed this franchise. What's the quote? They said like the losing stops here. I just thought
Yeah.
that was just so like perfect, and he really made my childhood probably like the best Nets years that I can remember.
Still.
It's
Like
still
we have
that's it for
we
me.
have two
This is
perennial all
it.
stars on our team, and it's still the Jason Kidd years. Like and Kevin Durant is my favorite. Is my current favorite player. So it's hard to say, but it is. Like I love that he's like my favorite player plays for my team. But in terms of Nets history, the Jason Kidd years. That's why he holds our records and for all the playoff records, and he still is the assists and steals leader for us. But yeah, anything else you want to add at this time before we go to Grown?
Thanks, I'm good. Thanks for having
Okay,
me.
thanks. Grown.
Salutations.
How's it
Blessings.
going, Ron?
All right, all right. I mean, I kind of knew what we were getting with Kid on, but superficially, right? Um, at this time, I was following the Nets when I was living in the Dominican Republic, so I could only log on to like NBA.com through a dial-up internet connection, which would last about 2 minutes before a call came in, and I would follow the team by checking up the stats. Um, and I used to check. I mean, we had Sam Cassell, Jason Williams at the time. Um, like that was the team, right? And then
Mhm.
I remember I was a fan of Marbury. This was the time when like MTV had like the Rock and Jock basketball stuff, and like Marbury would be there with KG. And I was a big fan of Marbury at that time. Um, so when he came to the Nets, that for me that was like a dream come true. I didn't understand it. I didn't know why. I didn't know how that was possible. But he came to the Nets. And I was like I was head over heels. Like this is definitely my team now, right? Like there's no doubt about it. I was in a country where everybody was a Lakers or Chicago Bulls fan. Um,
Mhm. Mhm.
Fast forward, this trade happens. The trade for Jason Kidd. Now I had never seen a Jason Kidd game ever at this time. I'm still living in the Dominican Republic, right? You very limited on what you can see over there. So I had never seen a Jason Kidd game, but that was the summer that he got traded was the summer that I actually moved back to Jersey. So my first Kidd game was was when he was wearing a Nets jersey. However, I knew of Jason Kidd because he already had a pair of sneakers, and like kids in school would rock his sneakers. So I knew that this whatever it was that he was bringing, he wasn't a slouch.
Mhm. Mhm.
So fast forward, we get Byron Scott.
Yeah.
Byron Scott, I remember in like an interview, he's talking about like what he was practicing with the team. And Jazzy, relax. And what he Jazzy, sorry guys.
It's okay.
And
I
what he
have a
was
cat behind
practicing,
me, so you're gonna hear her.
and what he was practicing was he was talking about like how to work on their breathing so they can explode properly when attacking the rim. Right? And how fitting was that for the team that we had at that time? Right? Like it was definitely run and gun. Like it was definitely attack, like rebound and push. Which brings me to my next point. Probably my favorite net of all time, which is actually not Jason Kidd, will always be Kmart. Because Kmart left it all on the floor.
He
Uh,
did. He
and he
did.
backed down to nobody. Like he didn't back down from anybody. And at the time was the person that would guard the five, the four, the three, the two, the one. Like in that time frame, Kmart was coming out to the 3-point line to pick up guards. And that was like, that's not something I had seen. Again, I was very limited to the type of ball that I would see, but I didn't see
Mhm.
Lakers doing that. I didn't see the
Mhm.
Bulls doing that. You know what I mean? Like they had very stationary players with the exception of their superstars. So that was like the biggest thing for me was Kmart. And that's from, the year before Jason Kidd came, we had um Steven Jackson with
Mhm.
Marbury. I thought that was supposed to be like a good. I mean, Steven. We didn't know anything of Steven Jackson. Steven Jackson actually had played in Dominican Republic for 2 seasons before ending up in the NBA. So I was aware of what he was, but still didn't know what he would contribute in the NBA.
Yeah,
But
we had Stephen Jackson for a spell. Yeah, I forgot about that. We did have him.
yeah, we were his first NBA team.
Mhm. Mhm.
We were his first NBA team. So um, it was just like, and you could see a little bit of toughness in Stephen A. Jackson, but he wasn't like that.
He wasn't there yet. That would
Yeah,
come like a little later, but
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And also that first year, Kmart barely didn't. Kmart also had some injury issues. But man, when J Kidd came, it just like it unlocked everything. But the most important thing was like the fit. The team just fit. The coach fit
It
the
fit
team.
like
The
it fit
players
like a
fit.
coat. Like I felt like when I was watching the game, I almost had a tear in my eye. Like, right? I think Byron Scott was really, really the perfect coach for that team.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Especially when you think about, the communication, you know what I mean? And how in sync he was with Jason Kidd. And I think it was great that we had a floor general like Kidd, but to me, he had the perfect team around him. And so when I was watching that game versus the Pacers, when we went to double overtime, it was like I was there and I wanted to shake Richard Jefferson's shoulder. I wanted to shake him violently for missing those damn free throw shots, like those free throws. I was like, you missed both, you damn rookie. Like you
Yeah.
missed both shots.
But you know what's crazy, and that's another thing that was like why this team was it was so good to be a fan of this team is that you saw the growth in Kmart, you saw the
Yeah.
growth in Richard Jefferson,
Yeah, you did. You
right?
did. You
Like you
did.
even saw growth in Brian Scalabrine for Christ's sakes. Like you know
Right.
what I
And
mean?
who only claims the Celtics these days, but yes.
Right. Like but we saw the growth in these players, right? And
Mhm. Mhm.
it was amazing to see. It was an amazing time to be a Nets fan.
It was. And but when we got to that portion of I swear, the last minute to me was when you think about all the commercials they played back then with all the breaks, that was like what, 15, 20 minutes probably, like on television.
Yeah.
Like it was so long, you know what I mean? Like, and I remember sitting there like, and of course I'm watching it with no commercial breaks, you know what I mean? So it's just going straight, but it still was a long time. And us missing, and when you have when you had Reggie Miller was actually missing a free throw on the other side, I was like, okay, this is an opportunity. You know what I mean? Like, even though I knew we were going to double overtime, it was perfectly set up for us to still win this game. And of course, we ended up going two overtimes. But to me, that's a classic game. We found a way to win that damn game. We gritted it out. You know what I mean? Like, Reggie Miller, ended up losing his shot towards when in the second overtime, really. But we gritted it out. We did what we had to win. We had the perfect team to grind it out. Do we have that team now? And I hate to do it and compare, but that's all I've been. That's one of the reasons I went back. I was like the roster construction. Yes, the game was played differently, but this roster was really a good team for the time period and for who we had as a general on the floor. But do we have a team now that can grind it out if we got that late? And we know how what we're doing in fourth quarters. Here, like I don't know, like it just had me reminiscent about the quality of the team we have for the type of ball being played and the type of players we're missing today. We then went on. Okay, go ahead.
I'll say the only thing that I regret from that time is that we didn't keep Keith Van Horn, and I know there were some issues.
Yes.
So that
Keith
but
Van Horn is interesting because I really liked Keith Van Horn, but when you look at, he was traded a lot,
yeah,
and some of these places he was a really good contributor, but he was still moved, so he couldn't stay anywhere.
he like his he was probably the weakest link when it came to like the mental toughness aspect of that Nets
Yes,
team, right? Like,
yes,
but he was still a force to be reckoned with offensively. And I feel like maybe that's something that he could have developed. I mean, we ended up trading him and Todd McCulloch for Dikembe, which we didn't really even play.
right.
So, I mean, for me, that's like one regret that I have from that team.
And Dikembe was up there at the time. Like it wasn't like we were getting a younger Dikembe, like the younger Matumbo. But
You
go
guys
ahead,
feel,
saying, and then we go to Steven.
did you guys feel like that Mutombo move was kind of like a overreaction? I think a little bit from
I
facing
mean,
the West teams. I felt like that was kind of what that move was a little bit like
Yeah, because
because
we
the
were smacked. We were swept. So
yeah
they
the
were trying to do something.
but see that's the thing. I knew back then that we were going to lose both those series because that was just during a time when the West was so dominant and it was so big. Everybody was so tall. Like everybody in the West just had had the players, and I felt like the Mutombo move was kind of like a bit of like, oh, okay, well, we'll come back with our big, and yeah, Jason Collins was 7 foot, but he didn't come till a little bit later in 2001, so I know he was still working on his game, but it just that was kind of like a bum thing because I Keith Van Horn was one of my favorites. Like I'm with you, grown like Kmart. What I always loved about Kmart was that he was a gritty player, but I never kind of looked at him like he was like out there to be dirty. He just wanted to play tough basketball, was not afraid to get in there and like mix it up and like hustle all the time. Like, yeah, that the losing Van Horn from Mutombo kind of that bummed me out. I wasn't happy because I think if he would have stayed, that would have I think it would have helped
And
extend that.
And to be clear, like my position with Kmart, like I do not understand why Kmart is not involved in this team at all. Like, there was that unfortunate thing with Jeremy Lin that back and forth, but I felt like that could have been a way for Kmart to actually be involved. Like all right, this happened. There was some ignorance spoken here. We can grow from this. We can move on. Come back home. You know what I'm saying? And let's get you involved in this team somehow, some way. But as far as like with the Dikembe thing, it's going back to that fit. Like in theory, Dikembe would have been somebody good for the team, but it just wasn't the fit. And like you look at Jason Collins, and I, being the young mind that I was at the time, thought that Jason Collins was a disaster, right? That like now at this age, I understand what he did and I appreciate it, and it was a much better fit. He was a grimy center. Like he did the dirty work. He did a lot of the dirty work. Um, but yeah, that the Kempe move, it just wasn't like in theory it looked good. On paper it looked good. So I don't know if I would say overreaction, but it
Well,
wasn't the right
the
fit.
word would be I understood what they were trying to do, but it just didn't fit. I think is
Right.
your the right way to say it. Yeah,
Right.
I think that's the better way to say it. Yeah, I mean, because now I'll save that for later. Go for it.
No, Stephen M., you want to jump in here?
First, I want to say thank God I made it. I was dreading this time period because I thought I'm at work and I just finished. I wanted to make it in here. So the first Malika, first things, thank you for putting this together. For the one thing I'll admit to is I was a late bloomer sports fan with all my sports. I didn't start really getting into sports till I got to high school, which was around the like '04 period. But I obviously knew of basketball and like knew it from the onset. I knew Jason Kidd was on the Nets. I just didn't follow it. So the one thing I wanted to jump in here and say is I'm grateful for the Nets community for how passionate you guys are to like just talking about these little things because like for me, obviously when I became a Nets fan, I tried to go back and watch all the clips and read about all the stuff and there's I can only see it from like a hindsight 2020 thing. Like you brought up the Mutombo thing and the first thing I brought up I thought of was like was that the overreaction to getting dominated by Shaq to have like a big man because at the time I think we only had McCullough.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. Um, and I will say, like, so grown, well, I think me and you are in agreement where, like, I love Jason Kidd, but I've always been like a passionate type player in terms of like when I play sports. So my favorite net growing up was Kenyon. I mean, I would go on YouTube and back in the day, I would wait for that thing to load and just like find mixed highlights and things and just how like unique of a ball player, like you said, he was so athletic um all the alley oops. I mean, you talk about like the highlights of today. There's a play where like Jason Kidd I think was like roaming baseline against the Sixers. He was like in midair and he threw an alley oop back towards the middle free throw line angle to Kenyon who finished it. It was just the connection those two had was amazing to watch and it like at the time like I said I didn't understand it in the actual process but man if you could have found a way to keep Kenyon Martin on this team. I know he had injuries and things like that, but it felt like he was like I don't want to say like the Draymond, but like the energy, the heart, like of this team, like a part of it. Because that nucleus, like you said, growing up. Because like I said, I would go back and try to find all this stuff. Like I've seen the like thank God for NBA TV and all the NBA Classic stuff. I eventually ended up watching uh, the Pacers game, the Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals, things like that. It's that team was so, like you said, it was just it. That's the combination you get when you get the right star players like Jason Kidd. You get contributors like RJ. You get the youth of RJ Kenyon growing into their roles and tiers like that, and then you get the role players like Van Horn and Kittle. And meanwhile, the whole and the coach at the same time, the right coach, everyone buying into the doing everything they can mentality, offense and defense. I mean, that team can run, man. I mean, I just remember again, just going back and just like you said, it was either it could a break with Jason Kidd could either end with an alley oop to Martin or RJ, or Kittle running to the 3 point line and just pulling up and knocking one down. And it was just so great to watch. So, I mean, I'm going to sit back now because I don't know how, um, I don't know how you're going to like run this if you just go through like the eras and things like that of like the years. Cause then once we get back into like when I started getting into the Nets, like I'll hop back in because that's obviously when I started following it and can talk more about like firsthand what happened. But I'm just loving the talk about the Jason Kidd start to it because again that the one thing I wasn't in the moment, but man, when you take a team from 26 to 52, I'll never understood how he didn't win MVP.
That's where
uh
I was going next because him losing the MVP was ridiculous. Like he did lose to Tim Duncan,
yeah,
but I felt like that was the year, and he was number two, like in voting, but he still should have been the MVP on that particular year.
and still like you said, he still holds all the records. I think 52 is still the highest win total for a Nets team, I think. um it's just
No, Buck
no.
Williams had a season that was higher, but yeah.
Okay, my bet. But yeah, loving this, man. Thank you.
Yeah, I that's where I was going next. I couldn't believe it when Jason Kidd lost the MVP vote, and Tim Duncan is definitely a formidable person to win it. But the 2002 team is magical. I hate that particular team. I just hate that we faced the Lakers. Um, but yeah, that team is magical, and it's still like one of my favorite Nets teams ever was that 2001, 2002 team. Then in 2002, we ended up adding, thankfully, we still had Byron Scott, but we ended up adding Dikembe Mutombo to that year. And we all just spoke about why that happened. But that was another season where we won. We didn't win 50, but we won 49 games that particular season. So we were still, we lost in the finals again, as we know. But that particular year, how did we feel about the flow of the team that year? That year we had, that was the year that we had Dikembe Mutombo and Jason Collins. It was another year of Jason Collins.
That was the 2020. That was the 2002 to 2003
Yeah.
series. I mean, it was
And
still fun to watch.
that's when Richard Jefferson started. He began to start at
Yeah.
that point.
I mean, it was still highlight. I mean, you still had a good chunk of returning players: Brandon Armstrong, Lucius Harris,
Yeah.
uh, Kerry Kittles was still there, Martin was still there, Scalabrini, Aaron Williams. Like I always low key liked Aaron Williams too. Uh, he was a solid guy. Like I mean, it was still good. It just I don't know. Like I still enjoyed it, but Van Horn that really hurt me. like
That
he
really hurt me too, but we
that
only
really
lost
hurt.
we only lost three. We went from 52 down to 49.
Yeah,
So in terms of the
it was
win
still a good
total,
season, but
it was
yeah.
still a good season. Yeah, we still had a good season.
Yeah, no, I still enjoyed it, but it was like, oh, it's kind of like I can relate it to like when we got rid of like Jared Allen, right? Like it just like you're excited for something new, and you still have a really good team, but it's like you're losing one of your favorite play because I just loved that lineup of Kenyon and Carey. Like it just I loved when they were all in there and Van Horn, and it just like I don't know, felt like you took part of the arm off. Is what it felt like for me. But it was still a great season because I mean the previous year when they played LA, like I was living in California at that time. Like that was the one year I was in California was that year we faced them, and it was like I don't think I ever saw one other New Jersey Nets fan anywhere. I don't even think
Right.
I don't even think I talked to anybody about the New Jersey Nets. Like, but yeah, that next year was great too. I had a little more hope for that. That I had a little bit more hope that fact that we didn't face the because just so I know, 2002, 2003. That's when we fought. That's when we faced the Spurs, and I had a little bit
Yeah.
more I had a little bit more hope that year, even though I knew they were a great team. I was like, okay, great. We don't have to face Kobe and Shaq. So I had a little more hope that we might, but it still was like, ooh, you're going up to. So I mean, it was still an exciting
Still a
season.
juggernaut, but it wasn't Kobe and
Exactly.
Shaq.
Like
Yeah,
so,
Shaq and Kobe. Yeah.
exactly. It gave me a little feeling of hope, but quickly realized, yeah, no, that's not happening.
And the fun in that year, we split the series with them. Like the two games we played against them, we split those. Um, so with that one, I was like, okay, with that one, we split them. And granted, when you play a team in the playoffs versus the regular season, not the same looks, not the same effort, not, but like I did like that we did face him. Yeah, you had to me, like you had Duncan, like, they were a pretty, tall team, but it was still, yeah. I mean, the Spurs. So before we get there, when we look at that season, that was a season we swept Miami. We had some good runs. Then we had, we swept and who do we have? We had a losing record versus Detroit. But other Detroit, and we also in Sacramento and SAC. Who was SAC? Who was SAC at the time?
Ooh, SA
Sac-
Sacramento.
Sacramento. That's
Yeah.
Sacramento. But I swear, I don't mean to forget the Kings. I swear, I don't mean to forget the Kings. But yeah, that we lost both games against the Kings, and we lost both games versus Utah. But for the most part, we had a pretty either we were tied with each team or we had a winning record. Besides those teams,
The Eastern Conference playoffs was great because we beat like the Milwaukee Bucks series, we
yeah.
beat 6, and then when we got second round, swept I think we swept the Celtics and swept the Detroit Pistons. Like those were some great I miss those late '90s, early 2000 playoffs were some of the best things I think I ever watched as a kid. Um, and
Yeah, and
I
that's when Kenyon and Jason Kidd were both had high points in scoring. Like it wasn't just, consistent, Jason Kidd. Like it was Kenyon was stepping more into his own at the time too, because he wasn't just a bruiser. He could actually score.
I have the playoff stats. Like Jason Kidd was averaging about 20 points. Kenyon was about 18, almost 19. Jefferson was averaging like 14, like a big leap from the year before. Kittles was like 10, and then everybody
Mm-hmm.
below was kind of like 7 to like 1 point. But by and large, like even then, like Kidd was still averaging almost 8 rebounds. Kenyon was averaging almost 10. Kid was almost averaging 9 assists, almost 2 steals. Same thing with Kemp. Like so
Mm-hmm.
was
Mm-hmm.
that was a good run up into the finals. It really was.
It was a good run up into the finals. But Jason Kidd did hit over 20, in that series. But up until then, if Jason Kidd got, like over 20, we were likely going to win the game. But when we got to the Spurs, that's when that run ended. And Jason Kidd can get close to 30 and we still lost. Um, and that was yeah, up until then that wasn't the case. But we did. I do love, and this is my pride. I do love that we did win, and those were some tight matchups. those weren't, so San Antonio series wasn't a blowout, you know what I mean, or anything like that. So we were close in all those games, but like the Spurs were just a little more for us than at the time. Oh, Grown, did you want to get in here?
Yeah, did I cut you off before? My audio just went crazy on me.
Nuh-uh. No, you didn't.
Oh, I was saying that that series against San Antonio, that's the one that really hurt because by that year,
Mm-hmm.
Kenyon Martin and Richard Jefferson had both developed a little mid-range shot. Though
Yep.
Kmart was limited, his mid-range only came from elbow to elbow. All around the court, though, RJ had developed that little mid-range shot. There was definitely improvement. Um, and we had Jason Collins, which, at the time, I was very ungrateful of what he provided because I could only see on the
Mm-hmm.
surface, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but man, that one hurt. And to know that we were able to win 2 games at least, that one hurt way more than the sweep. That one hurt way more than the sweep.
That was the other thought that just popped into my head was like Mutombo was practically worthless in the playoffs.
Yeah.
And
We
it
could
was
have
like
kept Van Horn, basically.
I kept thinking if we had Keith Van Horn, would have we won? Right? Like it just I don't know. Like because you still had like Jason Collins was still playing, like Aaron Williams was playing better, and like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Galabrini wasn't doing much different than what Mutombo was. So it was like yeah, that one was a tough pill to swallow. The year before I knew it was a wrap, but that year it was like, if you maybe would have just kept last year's team together intact fully,
Yeah.
like that could have been the one. That one really hurt.
That one did hurt, but my thing was, well, I don't want any blowouts. I want us to be competitive. I want us to fight. I used to hate the Western Conference back then. I still do to this day. Like if an Eastern Conference team, when we get to the finals, I'm always going to go for the East team. To this day, like it was a period where I felt like the West was just too dominant, and I still feel like everyone just loves the West, the West, the West, the West. The East needs some love, and I think it stems from the pain of losing these finals to Western Conference teams. Eddie, go ahead.
How you doing? What's going on, Malika?
What's going on?
All right. Yeah, no, that Spurs series. I think a couple people already mentioned it. That was the one that probably hurt the most to me because I didn't feel like the Lakers series. We really, as much of an upstart we were, I didn't feel like we really had a solid chance, especially watching, watching Kobe, Shaq, and watching that series against the Blazers. It was almost like a foregone conclusion that the winner of that Blazers Lakers series was going to win the championship, pretty much at the time. And you were just like, hey, we just want a shot in the dark. We want a shot. Hopefully, we have a puncher's chance. But that Spurs series is the key, because we literally did have a chance, because we went into that series. We were down. It was tied 2-2 going into Game 5 at home. And literally, I think we had the lead going into the fourth quarter when Steve Kerr, who didn't even play that much in the series or even played at all of a sudden lit us up in the fourth quarter, and that one hurt. And I remember it very well because I was there. So I was sitting there like, man, that one, Steve Kerr, out of all people, he was already, this is not Steve Kerr from the Bulls. This is Steve Kerr, barely playing with the Spurs, and he kind of came in spot minutes, and he just kind of lit us up in that fourth quarter with, I think it was about 13 points. So, after, and once we lost that Game 5 at home, there was no, we would have to win in San Antonio and then bring it back to Jersey again, and that was not. I think everybody knew that probably wasn't going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
it was that Game 5 that was key, because we were tied, and we went into the fourth quarter, I think either tied or with a lead. I couldn't remember exactly, but it was pretty close. But it was that Steve Kerr game in Game 5.
Yeah. Of course, we know what happened there. And then at the end of that season, the next season, we ended up getting Alonzo Mourning on the team. And we still had our core of Jason Kidd, Kerry Kittles, Richard Jefferson, Kenyon Martin. We still had Jason Collins. But with that team, we had fewer losses with that team. Um, we were still in the 40s. and I have all these records sitting here, and somehow, I mean, that season we were 47, so we still were, we went to the second round in the playoffs that year. So we were still a competitive franchise. We weren't championship level, but we were still winning playoff series. Um, how do we feel about this team?
Well, before I even say anything about that team, one more thing about the Spurs series, and I'm sorry to do this, but you know who else killed us was Steven Jackson, who we had before. That was like
Oh
the
yeah.
revenge thing for him right there, which that definitely hurt.
Mm-hmm. 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 He enjoyed that. Yeah. Yeah.
But you guys noticed the pattern that we were after that first team that won the 50 plus games. We kept hunting for size because we knew that was our weakness. We needed that big player, and that was one of the things that at the time when you Malika, you said about the East versus the West at the time. East was always considered inferior at
Yep.
that time, and it was always like, well, the West has all the great bigs. They have
Yep.
all the good bigs, all the great power forwards, and one of the
Mm-hmm.
weaknesses that we had, that was our weakness. We had Jason Collins, and we were just hunting. We grabbed the old Mutombo one year, and then all of
Mm-hmm.
a sudden we went after Morning the following year. You
Yep.
know what I mean? So it was always that hunt for that big. And I
Yep.
think in that Spurs series, what happened as well was that we another player that didn't actually step up in the finals, who actually played great for us all the time, was Kenyon.
Mm-hmm.
Kenyon got thoroughly dominated. People forget that. We love Kenyon, but Kenyon got thoroughly dominated by Tim. I mean, of course, it's Tim Duncan, so we expect it. But Tim Duncan, I think that was one of his greatest series in any finals, in any of the finals he played. I think there was one game where he literally almost had a quadruple double. So,
Yeah, but
the guy
Kenyon, I
where
mean, but Tim
he
Duncan is the GOAT
dominated Kenyon.
for. I,
Exactly. So it's nothing to hold your head down about, but
mm-hmm.
I think it just kind of went into the whole mindset of the organization of we need that big, and they kept hunting for that big, and I think that's why we went for Morning that following year.
So Eddie, you're telling me 20 years later we're still hunting for the
We're
big.
s- we're, we're still
What
looking for that
another
big
yeah,
player.
another Nets parallel from back in the
That's
day till now.
hilarious. That is a
We
great
are still
parallel.
20 years later looking for that big.
We're still looking for that big.
Absolutely, Saint. Absolutely.
The Nets are allergic to legit big men. That is what I am convinced about. Besides, you could say Brooke was, right? And Jared Allen potentially was going to be
Yeah.
that guy for us.
That's why losing Derrick Allen was so painful for me.
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
Like,
absolutely,
that's
absolutely.
why. I was like, of all the players to give up, this is the one hole we always had. And you
Yes.
Look,
give him up. I'm still livid. That's why I still watch his games. And I know Jay is like, once you're not in the Nets jersey, Jared Allen would be always be that player that I still watch. And because he was supposed to be here, man. But go ahead. Sorry.
no,
No.
and he also was didn't Morning come off of like kidney issues, and we
Yes.
still tried to grab him, and we still tried to we almost
We still
ignored the
went
fact that
for
he
it.
had issues. We still
Yeah.
went for it. Matumbo was about nearly 50 years old at that point. We still went for it. We still tried to play him and say, hey, we need a big, and like Saint said, and we're
And
still
it,
Hey, if
looking
we
for that
had
guy.
Rod Thorn, he would have got us big.
yep. And Morning wasn't even the player. That year we had Morning, he was, again, another guy. The year before with Matumbo being non existent. And then you go into the playoffs and he wasn't even on the playoff roster.
Man, the
You had
pain
just
of it.
you still had Aaron Williams, Jason
Mm-hmm.
Collins, Galabrini, and it was just painful. Like, that was that plagued. Like, because I honestly think if they would have had a legit big man on that team, like,
We would have had more of a shot. I
yeah,
mean, that was the hole, and that was usually our hole.
Our,
Um,
our best big during that era was Aaron Williams, and he was like 6'8", 6'9".
yeah,
at the
Man,
most.
thank you,
basically,
thank you.
basically, it's painful. But that year we actually won. We actually won the playoff series. Like this is to me after the Hay time, which I call 2001, 2002. then they get what 2-3. Then we're still winning playoff series. We're still going to the playoffs. We're just not going deep into the playoffs. We were just like a perennial playoff team at that point. But I still enjoyed it because we were competitive. We were still in the fight. I just think we all knew we weren't going to go further. We weren't going to go to the championship. But they were still fun years. But it still wasn't the mountaintop that Jason Kidd would eventually get when we went to the Dallas Mavericks. Now I know that as Nets fans, some people don't like Jason Kidd because when he came here as a coach, he was here 1 year and then he was gone, and just how ugly that separation was. Some people don't like how he left the Nets as a player, but I just appreciate Jason Kidd's time while he was here and where he took us as a player. I will always have appreciation for him for what he did for this team as a player. He basically put us on our back, and he basically pushed that team. He was the leader of that team, and I will always appreciate those years. Now, the 2003 and 4, only thing we can say about that is we did win a playoff series, but other than that, there's really, I mean, we were still competitive. Um, Kerry Kittles led in steals per game. Richard Jefferson was really starting to score. He was a scoring. Um, that's when he was our top scorer, basically, outside of Kenyon having his little spurts or Kid. It was really Jefferson that was stepping to his own as a scorer. That was a few years in at the time.
Look who we have up here. Somebody who probably knows very well about the Jason Kidd years. Scoop
Yes. Hey,
here.
Scoop. Thanks for joining
Hey
us.
y'all, what's going on?
What's
What up,
going
Scoop?
on?
Staying out the way, just chilling on a Saturday. Happy Saturday to all.
Happy Saturday. Thanks for coming up and definitely share with us anything you have from that time.
Uh, so I was around that team before Kid got there and after. And I remember, ironically, um, when Kid would come, Kid in the Phoenix Suns would come to the Meadowlands, and I remember he was teammates with Kevin Johnson. Steve Nash was his
Mm-hmm.
backup, and Sean Marks, if I'm not mistaken, was on that team alongside Danny Manning. And I remember getting one-on-ones pregame with Jay Kidd, and I also remember when he ultimately came to New Jersey, and I remember just all of the things that had happened prior to that. It was like a storm. Marbury found his way to Phoenix. There was, a lot of controversy as far as J Kidd and domestic violence, and this was pre-social media. But ultimately, he came in and made the New Jersey Nets a contender. I remember vividly Lucius Harris bowling ball passes. I remember the press conference with he and Byron Scott, and he definitely transformed that team into a contender the minute he stepped foot on the court.
And that's why to this day it's like even though I was a fan before his era, this is if you're a Nets fan for more than before KD got here, you were there before then. You remember the Jason Kidd period. This is the hate period, which is why so many people were excited about when the current superstars came. But it's still my favorite era, Jason Kidd. Do you remember any key competitive, any key like interviews or anything like that you can share with us from that time?
Oh yeah, I remember going to Nets practice back in I think it was 99, 2000. And I was sitting with Brian Scalabrine. I was in high school. I had a column in the school newspaper. And I remember sitting with Scalabrine. And in the background, you hear Kenyon Martin yelling at somebody. He was like, "How about you write a story on my effing life?" And like the whole gym like froze. And they just looked at Kenyon. And then they went back to just like having normal conversation. That was a very competitive bunch. I remember even, um, still going to games. I did my show with the Nets for 2 years, and then after that, still going to games, still going to practices, and just seeing the camaraderie. Anybody from Donnie Marshall to Um, I can't think of the backup point guard, but they used to call him Beetlejuice. His name slips my mind for a second, but um,
Anthony.
Anthony Johnson. Thank you. Yes,
Beetlejuice. I didn't know that. That's awesome.
yeah, they call him Beetlejuice on the low. Um, I remember, even after that era was over, and just sitting down and reliving some of that with guys on my podcast like Aaron Williams, talking about how difficult it was for everybody to contain Shaq. I remember Kenyon coming on the pod and talking about, he and Alonzo Mourning's beef in practice and how he hated shoot arounds and how, Alonzo Mourning wanted the team to practice and shoot around the way that they played in games, and that whole controversy with Kenyon sitting on the scorer's table or on the training table saying my ankle, and Kenyon said my kidney, and that was like a big thing after the fact years later. And really and truly, I think uh, the when J Kid came back as a head coach, briefly, um, kind of just talking about and reliving those times, I really think that was a full circle moment, because if you remember, I heard somebody talking about Ryan Thorne. You kind of saw how his era with the Nets kind of ended. I think about that text message when, he sent to Rod Thorne when he was like, I have a headache, and they didn't play against the Knicks and he wanted his money, and then ultimately going back to Dallas and winning a championship. But the Nets, I just feel like, have always had the opportunities. They just couldn't close the deal.
Yeah, we couldn't close the deal. I know people were excited when we got Vince Carter. It was like, oh, we got Vince Carter. Like there was an excitement around Vince Carter coming here, but no dice. Like it just didn't work out for us.
Here,
Like go ahead.
I I don't know. I'll wait for this controversial take.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Grom.
Yeah, go for it, Gron. I'll say something after you. Go for it.
Vince Carter was like very puzzling to me because he's somebody that had everything, that put everything together that you could possibly need in the game. But for some reason, it was never enough, right? And in a way, mm, here it goes. Brace yourselves. In a way, it's kind of very similar to how I feel about KD right now,
Uh-oh.
where it's just like everything is there. It's all there, but there's something missing, and it's not related to skills. Um, it, it's it wasn't. I don't know. Like there's something missing there.
Are you
Like it.
saying heart?
I mm, I don't know if it's
Because the
hard.
skill is there. So
I
what
don't know.
is the
I'm not
IQ?
exactly.
I wouldn't say he has a low. KD is not a
No,
low
it's definitely
IQ
not
player, so
IQ.
not that.
It's
Only
definitely
thing
not
left. That's
IQ.
why I went to heart because it's not IQ. It's not skill. Like to me,
Is it
part of it is team construction. Like I don't think he has the right team around him.
well, that's a good question, Malik. Is it, and I know people get really uncomfortable when you bring these things up, but it's like I mean, is it the fit with Kyrie? Is it the fit with the superstars? Like, because I thought the best we ever looked with the big three was with Harden. Unfortunately, we just never got to see that, right? And
Hmm.
with the emergence of Ben and Ben getting better and getting healthy, I am definitely seeing a new emergence of a different type of playing. And I do think it's going to take because see, that's the thing. Every time Katie, Kyrie, and Ben have played together, Ben has been at a different level. And I feel like now that we're seeing this emergence, there's like a part of the game that Ben wasn't doing and now is. Like he's attacking, and I'm like, whoa. And this changes the dynamic of what KD and Kyrie are doing. But I also felt like you go back to last night's game and you look at that first half of that game, and I was loving it, right? Like you could tell guys were still trying to fit in their spots, but it's like KD had a lot of wide open shots that he just wasn't making, right? Like imagine if those were going down. Um, it just, I don't
And he
know
acknowledged that after the game too,
exactly.
that he missed a lot of. He said he took the hit for the game, them losing the game, because he said that he missed a lot of wide open shots, and that's one thing about KD that I love. There's always accountability with him. You know, he's not one of those stars that shits blame. Like, he's my favorite player in today's game. I love watching him play. I love that he plays for my team. But in terms of Nets eras, this is not an. This is going to be an era. If you know, like right now, if this era were to end today, it will be the what could have been. Um, I don't know what we're going to call it, but we're going to call it something. The letdown era, the
He's
what
never had
should have been era.
he's never had a chance though, Malika, right? Like he's never really had a chance to get it going with any of the big three for a consistent amount of time outside of like obviously Kyrie, but it
No,
just
yeah, that's true,
yeah,
but
he
that's
yeah,
part of the what should have been the injuries. Um, the coach that they hired from the outset for this team. Like all of it, all of that is included when we discuss that era. This era, like say in the future, you know, whatever audio, whatever medium that we have, and we discuss this era, it's going to be the what could have, what could have, what should have, the injuries,
coulda,
the
woulda, could.
roster construction, the Sean Marks, the all of it. You know, like Joe Tsai, Kyrie, all of that is going to be in this era. This 30 for 30 is going to be something else. Like,
No, but see, well, let me ask you this, Malika, and then Grown, since you brought it up. Are you coming at it from an angle of like he's not doing enough, or it's just more of like a struck of dumb luck, bad luck?
for me, and Grown can go, it's a struck of, you know, it's going to sound stupid. I'm not superstitious, but I feel like it's a curse of some kind. What
Yeah,
you know, I feel like, you know, like when we feel like okay, we have something, it may take, like now it's like okay, you have some of Nets fans saying blow it up, you have some Nets fans like with no confidence in the season, and you have some Nets fans like okay, let's see, you know, it's early, let's see what we can do. But some people see the writing on the wall. We're not going anywhere. I'm one of those people that say if this team is the same constructed roster um, in April, we getting out in the first round because you know, I have to see how we play together. Ben is getting better as time goes on, and I think that Kyrie and KD they will have to adapt and how they're going to how that big three unit's going to play together. Because like KD even said something recently where he was like, um, Ben yelled at him to he should have dunked a ball in his podcast recently. And then he was surprised. He was like, "Oh, yeah, you're right." You know what I mean? Like, so Ben is coming to his own. So they will have to adapt. You know, the three of them will have to adapt. But I honestly think Mark still needs to make some moves to get the solidified team that we need to be competitive. Because right now, with good teams, you know, I don't see it. But we'll see what happens. I'm not writing off this team yet. But right now, as it's constructed, I don't see it happening.
Here's
Grown, your thoughts?
here's the thing. God, this is tough, man. This is tough. Here's why I can't side with dumb luck or bad luck. And I'm gonna knock on wood. Hope y'all heard that. Our players are healthy. Our players are healthy. We have very injury prone players. They're healthy right now. I'm gonna knock again. I hope y'all heard that. Um, and I'm not gonna say leadership, but and hopefully maybe Ben will become this. But we need somebody to orchestrate on the court. That's what I think we need. We need somebody to anchor defense on the court. We need somebody that is in constant communication, that strings communication together between all five players on the court at all times. Um, I'm not going to say that's necessarily leadership because leadership comes in different forms. I do think a big part of leadership is communication, but there's another part of leadership, you know, which is just like leading by doing, right? Which is what I think KD really does. Um, I mean, for those of you that have kids, right? Like you could tell your kid to do or not to do, your kid will do what they see you do. Um, and I feel like it's the same thing with the players on the court. So I don't know if I would necessarily say leadership, but um there is like a lack of orchestration that's not taking place on that court. Um, and I think communication is a big part of that.
Go ahead, AJ.
Y'all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Nah, I don't want to change the topic, but I just wanted to thank Malika for this space about the Jason Kidd era. I just wanted to get my quick memory of the era because I'm a younger generation Nets fan, so growing up, my aunt was actually a Knicks fan, and she would make me watch uh, Latrell Sprewell, Allen
Yeah, my
Houston,
family was Knicks
Chris
fans. They still
Childs.
are. Yep.
Yeah, she would make me watch those games when I was really young. But my mother was a Nets fan, so I would remember we would go to games, and I would rewatch Keith Van Horn. If you remember, Keith Van Horn used to have those high socks. He would always wear those high socks. So I asked my mother, why is he wearing these high socks? You know, as a child, and the Jason Kidd and the Kenyon Martin era. So every time I think about this Jason Kidd era, it just brings me good memories and like a good feeling. Um, because when I was younger, I couldn't really grasp the game of basketball because I was a little bit young. I didn't really understand everything that was going on, but you could understand the excitement and the winning, um, the excitement around the team at that time. So I just want to give my little memory of the the era and thank Malika for the space.
Thanks, AJ.
Thank
Yeah,
you, AJ.
Keith Van Horn, the kid, I started when I would play ball on the street. I would wear a headband because a kid, and I would pull my socks up because of Keith Van Horn.
Yeah, the high socks, man. That was
Yeah.
yeah.
Man, so crazy. Stephen M., you could go ahead. We're going to look to start our day and close out this room soon. But Stephen M., go ahead.
Thanks. I just want to hit on a couple points that you and Grown hit on. Were talk first, Malika talking about the team the past couple of years. I think I still go back to, and this is just how I'll always remember it. The Harden, Kyrie, KD team will always, to me, be the greatest team put together that didn't win a championship, and
The
that's just that.
greatest team that never was. Look how many games they played.
I know, but for that 5-game series against the Celtics and just how like dominant. Um, I know we lost a game, but like at the same time, it's like that team to me. I still have that. There's a picture going. I keep seeing once in a while of Harden had like 18 assists, 20 points, and 12 rebounds. Kyrie had like 39. KD had like 30. It was just some type of. It was just super like they. It was just fabulous. Um, and you had Griffin at the time who still had a couple jumps left in him, dunking on Giannis in that Bucks series. You had it just you had shooters theoretically until that series came to a close in the Bucks, but until Harden and Kyrie got hurt, that team to me will always be the greatest team ever assembled that didn't stay healthy and win a championship. And that's just to me at least how I always think about it. And then Grown, you brought up VC, which hit on exactly where I started following in the '04 season. And to comment on you, I think I don't like saying it because I don't like Vince Carter. To me is my favorite net, but at the same time there was just something missing where nothing should have been stopping him from being like a top 5 NBA player, and it just seemed like from certain nights something would be missing. It wasn't. I believed he was passionate about the sport. I believed he. It's just like I just remember coincidentally like Mark Jackson of all being our commentator or color commentator at the time, like commenting about like he should be in the post more and when he gets downhill and sometimes he would just settle for 3-pointers or mid range too much. But he was, he didn't have the Jason Kidd effect on us, but for a kid like me at the time, trading for a superstar like him, and for those first couple of seasons, how much of a like you could see like a superstar he was. I mean, obviously that game in Toronto, his game winner was one of my favorite games to always rewatch. But um, Yeah, it was just a comment and groan. I do agree with you, where it just seemed like something was missing. Couldn't put my finger on it, but he was a superstar in our uniform, which I think was cool because like I said, just for that charismatic feel to it. I mean, and that season, the one season of theirs, the kid era that I do, there was like we had no bench. That '05 season, I think we won 49 games. We won
Yeah,
the
we won 49. Yep. Yep.
49. We won. I think that was our last Atlantic Division title. Um, that team to me was always special because it was RJ and Carter. You had Kid just being the point guard. You had
We
Kristen.
won a playoff series at
We yeah,
least.
we beat Indiana in the first round, and then we just came in. I'll never forget it because as a young kid, we blew out the Heat in the first game of the second round, and then it was just all. Then D Wade just decided to become a Hall of Famer and turned it on after that, and it just after that, it was all downhill that series. Even though Carter, to me, the one play is like everyone focuses on that dunk he had in the regular season on Alonzo. I feel like the one he had, and I think it was game 4, he had on Alonzo because it was just straight on in the playoffs. I felt like he's even better, but that's just looking back on it, miss those days, like you said, the great old days, because that team, that Jason Kidd team with VC and RJ, I felt like was one of the better ones, but we just had no bench. I think our bench was basically like uh, Scott Pageant, Vaughn, and Planet. Who was it? There was a Zeron Planetich or something like that.
Zoran Planinic.
Yeah, we had like no bench. We had nobody to complement them sitting down. And that was I feel like that was one of our downfalls. But yep, talking to you, Malika, about this was a great thing. I know you want to close it down, and I'm rambling now, but yeah, it's great to relive those memories.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to this era. Like I'm kicking off the throwback series of every team, looking at different eras of like of every team. And I want to start with, of course, with my team because as a Nets fan, we're going to have another room on historical Nets. We're going to have a few others. The next room I have on the Nets will be on Drazen Petrovic, who is one of my favorite Nets to this day of all time. I don't care how many years he was in that. Like, he was one of those players that didn't give a damn about facing Jordan or any of those greats of that time. He, even Jordan said he was a bull. He was different. One of the greatest international players ever. And then when he got here, he brought a level, IQ level, and his skill level was one of the best. And we're going to discuss Drazen Petrovic. I don't know if I'm going to do him as a separate space or keep him with Derrick Coleman, because Derrick Coleman will always be my another what if he would have tapped into his full potential. Who knows where we could have went, but he was during the Bulls era. But still, maybe we'll look at his era like we look at the Kid era, like he went as far as he can go, like or something. But I feel like Derrick Coleman was the biggest enemy of Derrick Coleman sometimes, and we'll get into that when we get to the Derrick Coleman years, because there were some good things. I just felt like the potential of that team went as high as Coleman would go, if that makes sense. So we'll talk about Coleman, Kenny Anderson, Petrovic. We'll talk about those years. And we're going to also talk about the Julius Serving years. They were in the ABA. They are the 2 championships we do have as a team, with the ABA, and just how we even entered the NBA, making colossal errors. Like, the owner was under tremendous debt at the time and actually sold Julius Irving, the biggest star coming into the NBA from the ABA, sold him to the 76ers to pay off debt. And that decision is what cursed us for like forever.
But yeah, but
So we'll talk about that later. Go
and real
ahead.
quick, wasn't it that the Knicks wanted like
Yeah,
money?
three
Wanted like
million.
they wanted like 3 to 5 million because they were We were encroaching on their
we
market.
were entering their market. Yeah.
That was a bunch.
That was a bunch of bull.
Yeah.
But I just feel like us getting rid of Irving was just a colossal, like, oh my God, like, so that would be always a period that I just, Barry, we're about to close in a minute, but my next room in the series is going to be next week on the Cleveland Cavaliers with Mark Price, Brad Daugherty, and Ron Harper. They were a formidable team, and I am personally picking up the mantle on Mark Price deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. We're going to talk about Mark Price. I'm a Jordan fan, by the way, Barry. I am a Jordan fanatic. He's my favorite player of all time. But I feel like Mark Price is overlooked. When you the players that got in, he should be in. But we're going to talk about that team because I feel like they were competitive, but they're overshadowed because, of course, LeBron, the LeBron Cavaliers years, which he deserves it. But there was a period before LeBron where they were actually good. So we're going to talk about that period. And I have a room coming up on Mahmoud Abdul Rauf's autobiography. We're going to talk about that. I don't know if Carla's still joining me because I think she's not doing spaces anymore. But I'll talk to her and see if we're still doing that. We're going to talk about Mahmoud Abdul Rauf. So I do have some rooms coming up. So definitely check me out. We're going to go through every team, and we'll eventually come back to the Nets. Check out Saint, him and AJ Rage. They have Nets Kingdom. They do YouTube Live, and they have podcasts, and then they have YouTube Live that they do after every Nets game. Check out. Well, you will see Grown, myself, and the rest of us on the Nets Twitter Spaces that are usually after every game, and then checking me out on the Rewind Pod. I'll be launching a formal podcast probably late December, early January. But check me out on here every week. I'll have a new space and it's uploaded to YouTube, so you can check me out. All my old shows on YouTube. And thanks a lot, Saint. Anything you want to say closing this out?
Yeah, just want to thank you for putting this together. I know you and I did the scheduling dance, and me working and you
You
recovering.
have a crazy schedule.
I do. Well, it wouldn't be bad if if we weren't so short staffed. But yes, it's gotten. I went from having 7 months off to full time overtime work. So, but I really enjoyed this and appreciated it. I really glad you put this together. So thanks for asking me part of it. Because I had fun kind of reliving, going back and looking at the videos, reading stuff. It really kind of took me back to a different time, so I appreciate you making me part of this, and yeah, please follow Malika. Always love. I think I've done a couple of these with you now, and I always have a good time. So thank you so much.
Now, I think I'm the most ancient member of, despite what Brandon says of Nets
Yeah, I'm.
fans, I'm one of the ancient ones. So I'm going to, and Eddie, I don't know, like if you want to join me, I'm not trying to age you or anything, but I need to talk about the Derrick Coleman years. And I do not want it to be a dissertation. I do not want to be given a class and be the only one speaking during that room. But I am going to have a room on Petrovic and the Derrick Coleman years because I think people look upon that era and I think they see something different than I do. And I'm going to tell it from my perspective that that team went as far as Derrick Coleman will rise itself to. And that's why it's not looked upon as favorably as it should be because that is the truth. Eddie, anything you want to say about that before I close out? Because you took your hand off the mic.
Oh yeah, no, that was the biggest what if era for me. So because it just had so much potential, Malika. With
It did.
Petrovic,
Petrovic.
Derek Coleman, and Kenny Anderson, who was a young
Yep.
up and coming point guard, all star point guard. So
Potential.
yeah,
But
potential. Yeah, never kind of, and I think both guys made the All Star team one time too. So
yep,
it's just that was the biggest what if for me. Start the first one. At least that was my first what if team. So. Uh,
that is the first one. They did hit they were in the same conference as the Bulls. So and we do know how dominant the Bulls were at the time. The Bulls, the Knicks, they were a few teams that were always in the fight, and I don't know if we could have beat, but The Bulls, yeah, we usually got knocked out, I think, by the Bulls a few times. But at the same time, it is a what if period for me. So see you guys soon. I will definitely let you know when the next Nets groom is. But next week, I'm definitely talking about the Mark Price Cavs. Have a good day and enjoy. Now it's time to take my niece to the bookstore and let's find some books and get her some knowledge. Thank you.
Goodbye.